My name is Gabriel, and I've been a security guard for the last 30 years of my life. I can safely say that I've seen everything there is to see in this job, and of course I've also witnessed several inexplicable events. I want to make it clear that I don't like to categorize all my experiences as paranormal, because I think many times there's a logical explanation for what we see or feel. However, sometimes there's no sense at all, and we simply have to accept that there are things we don't understand and that there are probably residual forces or energies that linger in certain spaces after those involved have left or even passed away. You see, about 20 years ago, I worked as a security guard at a shopping mall. My shift started around 8. We cleared people out, and by 10 the mall was deserted. However, there were always some employees and owners who stayed an extra hour cleaning and taking inventory, things like that. My coworkers at the time, and I already knew most of the faces, so it wasn't strange to see them walking through the aisles toward the exit or working inside the stores. On December 2nd, it was quite cold. I was walking on the 4th floor around 11 p.m., looking at the Christmas decorations that had been put up. At that hour, it was already rare to see an employee at the mall, but it wasn't impossible. I heard voices in the distance and radioed my colleagues to ask where they were. They were scattered between the main entrance, the side entrance, and the parking lot. I assumed they must be some straggling employees. I went downstairs, and from there I could see 4 people sitting at a table in the food court. My eyesight has always been pretty good, so even though I was about 200 meters away, I could clearly make out that it was a family. 2 children and their parents. Such an ordinary sight. A family in the food court felt eerie at that hour, as it was impossible for them to be there. I felt what I can only describe as an icy breeze run down my spine, but I managed to control myself, thinking that somehow we had forgotten to tell them the mall was already closed. Pretending to be strong, I walked toward them, crossing the corridor until I entered the area where they were. They were sitting, chatting, laughing. In front of them were some empty trays, and they didn't notice me until I got quite close. They remained silent without looking at me, and I greeted them as politely as I could. "Good evening. Excuse me, the mall is already closed. Please follow me. May I accompany you?" The father, a tall, dark-skinned man like me, didn't let me continue. He looked me in the eyes, not with anger or arrogance, but with a smile and a sad look, and answered, "We know, but let us stay a little longer. It's our anniversary." I was younger and a bit more naive back then. I assumed they were talking about their wedding anniversary and told them something like, I'd take a walk, but they had to leave as soon as I got back. I walked slowly and radioed Christian, the guy who was supposed to be in the parking lot. "Hey Christian, just curious. Are there cars in the parking lot?" He was silent, as if he didn't quite understand why I was asking, and answered in a rather calm tone. "The usual suspects, the McDonald's manager and the one his employees share. Why?" Everyone was listening to the conversation, so I alerted them. "There's a family in the food court, and I gave them some time to leave because they told me it was their anniversary. I felt bad asking them to leave, but I don't want them wandering off. If I lose them, keep an eye out so we can help them out." We were all relatively new to that mall, so Juan Pablo, another one of the security guards, started to scold me for being so nice. Those people should have left an hour ago, and I should have been firmer. And he was right. We could get into trouble. And to be honest, at another time it wouldn't have been difficult to get them out of the mall, but something about them told me it wasn't right to rush them. I kept walking and just happened to pass the McDonald's, where the employees were finally closing up to leave. I went up to them and said goodnight. The manager came up to me and greeted me by name. We used to talk as soon as they left, and I just couldn't hold back. I asked her about the family sitting in the distance and if they were the ones who served her the food. I swear I've never seen a face turn so pale as that night. Her voice trembling, she asked me what the date was, and when I told her it was December 2nd, it was as if her mind had remembered something she wanted to block out. "Hey Gabriel, I'm leaving now. That family, leave them alone, they'll leave on their own." And she didn't give me a chance to ask her why was she so nervous. She simply told the employees to follow him, and they headed toward the stairs on the left, which struck me as extremely odd, since that was the way to the mall parking lot. It was obvious they didn't want to pass near that family, and that made me quite nervous because I didn't know what he meant by that. I kept my eyes glued to them and felt quite uncomfortable with the situation. I checked my watch and noticed it was almost 11:30 at night. I mustered my courage and approached them again, hoping my presence would motivate them to get up from their seats and leave. Again, they were talking and laughing until I approached, and suddenly they froze like statues. "Hey sir, excuse me, but you really have to leave. It's really late. If you want, I can call you a taxi." "We know, but let us stay a little longer. It's our anniversary." Again, the same words, and again the same feeling of unease and guilt that at first made me sigh, gathering strength to look that man in the eye and tell him they couldn't stay there any longer. But before I could speak to him, he said, "We won't see each other again for a year. Just let us stay for 1 more hour." I stepped back and sat at the other end of the food court, watching them laugh and chat. I obviously couldn't hear anything, but I could see a certain joy in their expressions. 20 minutes passed, and when my colleagues asked me what had happened, I told them the truth. "I can't kick them out. I'm sorry. Let them stay until midnight. Everyone told me I was a fool, that if those people appeared on any store's security cameras, we'd definitely get fired. But I stayed calm and trusted the words the McDonald's manager told me. They'll leave on their own." At this point, you might be wondering if I thought those people were spirits or not. And the truth is, I don't even know what I was thinking. I only know that I was scared and freezing. The food court felt particularly icy, like I was inside a refrigerator, and I was struggling to control the trembling of my hands. I could even see my breath condensing in front of my face. Every 5 minutes I checked my watch, wishing it would finally strike midnight so that this peculiar family would leave the mall. I was so anxious, and my gaze was so fixed on them that there came a point where I simply couldn't look away. And the only reason I realized it was midnight was because the bells of a nearby church rang out at that exact moment, striking 12 precise chimes. My heart sank as I watched them get up, and suddenly they surrounded the table and began to hug each other. It was a stunning and moving sight, and in the blink of an eye, it turned terrifying. My eyes closed for an instant, a millisecond, and when I opened them, they were gone. I jumped up, not caring that I knocked over the metal chair I was sitting on. That crash echoed throughout the mall, according to my coworkers. I ran to where that family had been sitting. I looked around and saw nothing. I kept glancing over my shoulder, afraid that in one of those glances a ghost would appear and give me the fright of my life. However, I didn't see anyone, and I couldn't explain how they had disappeared. I radioed them, frantic, and yelled that the family was gone, that they should be on the lookout at the exits. I searched the entire mall from top to bottom, so nervous I could barely go down the stairs without falling. I never found them again. That situation deeply affected me, and I wasn't able to find an explanation until the following weekend when I ran into the McDonald's manager again. We met in the parking lot just as he was leaving, and I took the liberty of stopping him. "Excuse me," I said. "I know you must be exhausted by now, and I imagine you don't like these kinds of topics, but something has been keeping me up at night these past few days. Do you know what happened on December 2nd? You know, with the family in the food court." I felt so embarrassed bothering him because I saw his expression change from calm to utterly distraught with fear and discomfort. However, he got out of his car, letting me know he was willing to answer my question. He sighed heavily and let me continue. "Well, I wanted to know if you know what was going on with that family. They gave me a real fright because they suddenly disappeared, and I couldn't see where they went." The manager looked at me, and after thinking for a second, he answered quite clearly, and I've never forgotten his words. "That family meets in the same place every year on the last night. Several years ago, they came to look at toys and buy clothes for the children, and they stayed quite late buying food. When they left, they were driving home when a truck lost its brakes and hit the family. None of them survived. You know what you saw, and if you want my advice, it's best not to dwell on it too much. Let it go, and when you see them next year, leave them alone. They always leave on their own around midnight." I thanked him for what he told me and waved goodbye as he left. It was hard to hide it, but he definitely noticed how pale I turned. So pale, in fact, that I had to sit against a wall to recover. I worked another year at that mall, unable to believe it could all be real. And over time, I blocked it out until December 2nd, when I felt like I couldn't breathe. Seeing the same family gathered around the same table, wearing the same clothes, I froze, staring at them, and my panic didn't subside until I got a radio call. I immediately alerted Juan Pablo and Christian. I told them that the same family was sitting in the same place. I told them everything, and they went up to see for themselves. They were speechless when they saw them, and we simply decided to let them be. I haven't often witnessed something so real and so sad. I asked some people who know about the subject, and based on their opinions, I came to the conclusion that more than ghosts, what I saw was the residual energy of that family who, after the tragedy that ended their lives, returned on the same date to relive the last hours they experienced together. Although that doesn't explain why the father seemed to be the only one answering me coherently, as if he were actually there. Was he really anchored in that place? His energy was able to evoke that last night with his family. I don't know. And as for that man, I hope that one day he finds peace and is reunited with his family, who are surely already waiting for him. Hi, my name is Fabiana, and I recently started working as a security guard in a fairly large residential complex. I prefer not to be too specific about where I'm from since I still work there, and I think I'll continue to do so for a while. The pay is quite good compared to other places, and I don't think I could easily find anything better. It all started one morning when I saw they were looking for security guards while driving through the area and applied because I really needed the money. To my surprise, they hired me and 2 other guards right away. They explained my responsibilities, watching the common areas, being alert for suspicious activity at night, especially in the parking lot where several robberies had already occurred, and helping any neighbor who called if needed. Nothing out of the ordinary. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I took the liberty of asking one of the owner's representatives why he hired me. And he told me it was because many neighbors and elderly residents felt safer asking a woman for help. It seemed like a very strange, even silly reason to me. But today, I know it was just an excuse, and that the real reason for hiring me was that no security company had employees willing to work in that residential complex anymore, and they had good reason to. I started on Monday, and my shift was from 8 p.m. until 6 a.m. The residential complex was quite large, with several buildings, green areas, playgrounds, a basketball court, a soccer field, and a central parking garage with 6 floors. Each building is 15 stories high, so a lot of people live there. My colleagues and I were given radios to communicate and alert whoever was staying at the entrance so that in case of emergency, they could call the police. I went to do my rounds. There were still several people there at that hour. People were coming and going, and even some children and teenagers were playing on the basketball court. I wasn't paying attention to them and just walked along until I noticed some strange movement behind some bushes. I saw the back of a small boy in a red shirt, and since he seemed to be hiding, I assumed they were playing hide and seek, but I looked at the other children and they weren't looking for anyone or trying to hide. I approached very slowly to ask him what he was doing, but before I reached him, he hid behind the bush. I'm talking about him being about 4 or 5 meters away, but when I got there, he was gone. For a second, I thought he'd run off and I hadn't seen him because of where I was standing, but it was impossible that I hadn't seen him go. I thought it was a prank by the kids, a hazing ritual for the new guard. But if it was a prank, they didn't seem to have realized it because they weren't even looking in my direction. A very strong chill ran down my spine, and even though I turned around a couple of times, I didn't find that boy again in that area. I still wasn't very comfortable with my colleagues and didn't want to project an image of weakness or fear, especially since I was the only woman in the group. I continued my rounds relatively normally, and after an hour I was back at the guard post. Another guard, Julio, asked me how it had been, and I said it was fine without going into much detail. We sat there for a while until Martin, the other guard, arrived, but he looked a little distraught. We asked him what was wrong, and he scratched his head, unsure whether to tell us or not. But after a while, he decided to. I think I understand now why they gave us this easy job. This place is really weird. We asked him why he said that, and he explained that he was doing his rounds in the parking lot when he noticed a woman in the building next door watching him from one of the apartments. She was standing at the window with the light on behind her. She stared at him in a quite penetrating way, and when he raised his hand to greet her, the light went out, and he could no longer see her. He continued his rounds, and on his way back he saw her again in the same spot. He didn't want to get his hopes up, but something inside him told him something wasn't right. He turned toward her, but instead of looking at her, he looked at the apartment. It was empty, without furniture or pictures inside. The woman had black hair, a green dress, and quite pale skin. Again, the light went out, and a car alarm began to blare on the floor where it was. Martin explained that he jumped up and looked around, but the parking lot was empty, with only several parked cars. Since Martin had spoken, I also told them what I saw. None of us wanted to think that on our very first day we were going to encounter a paranormal event, so we tried to reason through the situation, and we convinced ourselves that a group of neighbors was playing a prank on us and that everything would be all right. An hour later, Julio and Martin went out to do another round, and I stayed in the guard booth watching the security cameras of each building and listening to some music to keep myself entertained. It was around midnight, and since it was a weekday, there was no one in the common areas. Every now and then I saw Martin and Julio walk by, but nothing else caught my attention until the radio came on. I thought I would hear one of my colleagues, but a few seconds passed and I only heard static from the other end. I picked up the radio and greeted. I tried several times, but no one answered on the other end. I assumed one of them had accidentally turned on the radio, and just as I was about to turn it off, I heard a timid hello from the other end. I asked who it was, but no one replied. When they returned from their patrol, I asked them if it had been one of them, but neither of them knew what I was talking about, and in fact, they hadn't heard me speaking through the radio either. We asked Julio if he had seen anything strange, and he said that he didn't see anything. But he did feel a strange atmosphere in the residential complex, as if it were too quiet. I know it sounds silly since it was nighttime and obviously people weren't making noise at that hour, but to give you an idea, people usually sleep with the television on, and some go to bed later than others, so it's normal to hear people talking even late. But in that residential complex, all you can hear is the breeze and the footsteps of the security guards as they walk around. Nothing else. Fortunately, nothing else happened that night, although I admit I was a little scared because of those little things we had seen and heard. The 2 night watchmen from the morning shift barely arrived. We left immediately, and I forgot about what had happened. The following days I returned, convinced that everything we had experienced was just coincidence and the neighbors' jokes. Nothing important happened, to tell the truth, and work was quite peaceful, although there was always some strange shadow or reflection when we would walk through the park or the parking lot. A week later, I started my shift. Nothing happened the first few hours, and I relaxed quite a bit while Julio and Martin made their rounds around the residential complex. Around 1 a.m., I was listening to music, waiting for them to return, when suddenly the gate to the residence opened. I stood watching the entrance, waiting for a resident's car to pass, but after a few seconds, the gate closed. I got up from the guard booth and went outside. I went to see what was happening. Again, the gate opened, but I could clearly see that there wasn't a single car waiting to go through on the other side. That made me quite uneasy, and I turned to look at the nearest building, but it was impossible. It was about 100 meters from the main gate, across some green areas, and past a meeting room with a small guest parking lot. It was impossible for a neighbor's gate remote to have that range. I thought maybe there was a neighbor inside or outside playing a prank on me. I felt bad and started walking around hoping to find him hiding behind a wall or crouching behind a tree. But I didn't find anyone, not at least before Julio came running up. I noticed he was quite agitated, and when I asked him what was wrong, he assured me that he had seen him, that he had seen the boy. He was walking back through the park and heard a child's laughter. He was worried because it was too late for a child to be playing around there, and besides, there wasn't an adult in sight. He approached the sound, and hidden under the carousel, saw a boy in a red shirt. He realized it was the same boy he had seen. Julio crouched down and tried to talk to him, but the boy was laughing loudly, his face buried in the ground. He said something like, "Kid, what are you doing here? Where are your parents?" But the boy didn't answer and instead looked back at Julio. When he looked directly at him, his eyes were black and his face as pale as a sheet of paper. Julio heard him say something, but he didn't understand because he barely heard him. He saw it, and he ran as fast as his legs could carry him until he found me standing near the gate. I even forgot that the gate had opened by itself twice in a row. I was so shocked by what he was telling me, and my blood ran cold when he said, "That's not a child. There's something evil about him, I'm sure of it." Then Martin arrived, having made a quick round of the parking lot, and seeing us so upset, asked if anything new had happened. We told him what happened, and he said nothing new had happened to him. Only the woman at the window incident repeated itself. We started feeling quite unwell, but we had to keep working. After 15 minutes, I went out on my rounds, summoning my courage. I told myself I wasn't going to chase ghosts. I was being paid to watch over the place, not to do medium work. And I thank God that, although I'm a believer, I've never been a fearful woman or one who loses control over this kind of thing. I started my rounds like any other. I took another look around and focused on making sure there weren't any suspicious people hiding or anyone trying to jump the perimeter wall of the residential complex. I relaxed quite a bit when I didn't see or hear anything until my radio crackled to life. Julio had stayed in the guard booth and said, his voice quite fearful, "I'm sorry, Fabiana, but I was watching the cameras and I noticed someone strange moving among the cars in the parking lot. Can you go check it out?" Obviously, I couldn't refuse, so I took a deep breath and headed towards the parking garage. It had only one exit, a staircase, and ramps for the cars. I started going up the ramps and carefully checked the stairs before proceeding. It was well lit by fluorescent lights, so I didn't need a flashlight or anything like that. I didn't see anyone suspicious, and even the supposed apartment where the woman who was harassing Martin was staying had the lights off. I reached the top level without any problems, and as I was about to go down, a car alarm made me stop. I looked in that direction. I approached cautiously, radio in hand in case I needed to call for help. And suddenly, another car alarm went off at the other end of the parking lot. I felt exposed and was overcome with an urgent need to run. I stood my ground, but that's when I saw her out of the corner of my eye, a silhouette moving away from me, going down the ramp toward the 5th level. It was a young woman in a green dress with black hair. My whole body tensed when I saw her. I walked toward the edge of the railing. The woman climbed onto it, and although I tried to stop her, she jumped into the void. I ran toward her while radioing Julio, yelling for him to call the police because a girl had just jumped from the 5th level of the parking garage. I was terrified, and when I looked down, the woman was gone. I couldn't believe it. I ran down the stairs hoping to see her again, but my eyes didn't deceive me. The woman wasn't on the ground. I can't understand why, but suddenly my instinct made me look up, and there she was, watching me from the 5th level of the parking garage. I told Julio to cancel the call because what I saw clearly wasn't real. I've been working at this residential complex for 3 months now. Julio couldn't handle the pressure, but Martin is still here. And a new security guard named Jesus started a week ago, and so far he hasn't mentioned seeing anything. Meanwhile, I'm staying calm, even though there isn't a single day that goes by without incident. Anyone who doesn't feel, see, or hear anything strange, I've gotten pretty used to it. Although there is something that bothers me, and that's why I always ask Martin to cover for me on those rounds. It happens that when I go to the parking lot and get to the top level, I don't know how to explain it. I feel something that compels me to jump from the 5th level. It's like an intrusive thought that gets into my head, and I have to force myself to get to the stairs. I've never had thoughts like that before, and it bothers me because I feel like I'm carrying that woman's spirit. She wants to take me with her somehow. We haven't been able to speak to any of the owners about it, and I doubt they'll tell us in detail what's going on, but I know this residential complex has some spirits, and at least 2 of them are quite malevolent.